We're here today to talk about fossil fuel divestment. Fossil fuel divestment is part of research that goes under the umbrella of environmental social governance research. But I'm speaking to a different audience today to what I normally do, so I tried to think about it in terms of what does that mean? And I think in this audience, what that means is that sustainability finance research is the world's insurance against rogue companies. And through that, you have the opportunity to change company behaviour. But there are many ways to change company behaviour, many different ways, and not each one is as effective as the other. On Friday, I was sitting in my office and I looked out the window on the first floor, so I got a good view of the ground floor, 56 Pitt Street, and I saw a group of protesters form. It was about 30 people with signs, and they had signs, you know, stop the waste dumping, Australian waste being dumped in Malaysia. And I looked down upon them and I was a little disappointed. I wasn't disappointed at what they stood for, but I was disappointed at the way they were going about it. I mean, you know, protesting is one way to make your point heard, and protesting has been effective. I mean, you know, heaven forbid my wife's French, and we know the French love a good protest. Is it the most effective way? Is it the most effective way to make companies listen? I've been trying for a long time to make companies listen, or to work out how best to make companies listen. The last time I was at GreenUps, I was representing an organisation that I co-founded with my wife called Climakind. It was in the climate change space, looking to reduce global carbon emissions. Today I'm representing a financial service provider of research, MSCI ESG Research, who identifies and analyses companies' environmental, social and governance issues, the issues that they face. And our target is investors. So the audience I speak to on a day-to-day basis are some of the world's largest global investors. You know, the investment managers, the superannuation funds, companies, consultants and academics. When I joined MSCI, I joined MSCI ESG Research because I saw that it provided a much more powerful way for me to drive sustainable investment and engage companies on these issues. Much more powerful than I could have done when I was with Climakind. And what I want to discuss with you today is, you know, how to do that. And we're all here. We're all activists. We want to see more action in the green space. You know, we are all activists. We know what the issues are. You know, no company can hide in today's world from social media. And organisations like MSCI ESG Research are investigating in depth the way companies behave. You know, their involvement in fossil fuels, their involvement in tobacco production, but also what they're doing in terms of the environment, in terms of toxic waste, like the people who are protesting against Linus were downstairs. But again, it comes down to what's the most effective way in today's world to engage these companies. And what my experience has shown is that it's through ownership, through company ownership, or in today's case, through divestment, equally as powerful. Of course, as individuals, you know, if you're like me, you probably don't have a large shareholding. You probably don't have a big holding in companies to be put onto their share registry. And I mean, like me, you might be in the same position. If I sold my shares, it certainly wouldn't ring alarm bells in the boardroom of BHP. But you do have a means of changing company behaviour. You do have a voice that can be heard at the board level, and that is through your superannuation. And if I ask you in the audience, who here has contributed to or contributes to a superannuation fund, put up your hand. There you go, the majority of us. The superannuation industry in Australia holds $1.8 trillion of assets. Get that, trillion. By 2030, that will be $6 trillion. Already at $1.8 trillion, that's bigger than the Australian economy. These superannuation funds own companies in Australia and overseas, and they own them on your behalf. Superannuations are called trustees because they're entrusted with your retirement savings. And like the majority of Australians, I bet you're not doing much with your super. Some people probably don't even know who their super's with. Superannuation is being treated very passively in Australia. It's quite new. I think that's one of the excuses is it's quite new. You know, it hasn't been around for a long time, so we don't really know what to do with it. And we're just hoping that there's enough left when we retire. But in fact, superannuation is there as your opportunity to change corporate behaviour. And superannuation funds are listening. They're your friends. They're your allies. It's not like they're there and, oh my gosh, we don't understand, that's finance, we can't really make a change there. Superannuation funds are there to listen to your concerns. The superannuation funds I deal with come to me often and say, hey, we've been asked by a member what our exposure to fossil fuel is. Can you help us determine what that is? So it's actually happening. And it's been happening for, in earnest, about 12 months. Ever since Bill McKibben came out to Australia and spoke about the 350.org Unburnable Carbon. I mean, what a genius he was to put a label to what I think had been understood for a long time, that we need to keep fossil fuels underground. So, as I say, the more proactive super funds actually have people who are listening out for what you have to say and what your concerns are. So ask your super fund what they're doing in terms of fossil fuels. Ask them what they're doing about their exposure to climate change. But don't just stop there. You know, we know that the environmental and social and governance issues that companies face are much broader than that. And as investors, you're exposed to that. Through your superannuation, you're exposed to company behaviour and how they're treating the environment. Just like these protesters were complaining about what Lynas is doing in Malaysia, there are similar issues Australian companies have in Australia. For instance, what Orica is doing up at Newcastle, putting mercury into the local rivers. And there's a number of examples that we can talk about. Santos is another one. If you had opened the papers on the weekend, you would have seen a list of them. Santos, News Corp. Santos bought Eastern Star Gas a couple of years ago. If they had have come to us, we would have shown them the environmental social governance report on Eastern Star Gas, which showed that their management of toxic waste was atrocious. They didn't have any management controls. So when Santos bought that with investors' money, they in fact ended up with a liability, not an asset. They paid $1 billion for something that they haven't been able to use to generate revenues because regulators stopped them from operating that company. Same with Qantas. Back in May 2011, we wrote a report downgrading Qantas because of the issues they had with labour management, industrial relations. They just didn't have the network in place to support the issues being raised up through their labour force. And it was only 6 months later that Alan Joyce shut down the company in October. You probably all remember that. Maybe some of you were stuck in an airport somewhere. The share price collapsed 33%. And the reputational risk is still happening today. They were just on the news recently about their share price and the issues that they've suffered there. MSCI ESG research covers these companies. We cover these issues. We understand the fossil fuel exposure of over 9,000 companies globally. And we don't just understand, when I say fossil fuels, it's not just, hey, they have carbon emissions underground in reserves. We know what kind of reserves they have. We don't just know whether it's coal, we know whether it's coking coal or thermal coal. We know what kind of oil it is. Because investors at the moment are still trying to work out, so investors, super funds are still trying to work out what the hell to do about this. They don't know whether they should be getting rid of everything, because if they get rid of anything, geez, we'll have no power in Australia. If we shut down all the coal production tomorrow, then unfortunately we still rely on coal. Even though we're moving towards a renewable energy future, as long as the Abbott government keeps its hands off the policies. So they're dealing with these issues, and I think there's no golden solution. There's no one tick, wave a magic wand and fix this problem. But the the answer, the way to approach this is in your hands. Because by you engaging super funds, you are driving change for a better future. And I'll borrow from a quote that came from a TED talk that Chris McNett did on sustainable investing. If you haven't seen it, join the other 660,000 people in the world who have. He uses a quote from Mark Twain, which I thought was appropriate and probably gels well with this conversation, this topic and this audience. And it came from Mark Twain and said, plan for the future because it's where you're going to be spending the rest of your life. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions when we have the panel.